Marriage is supposed to be 50-50. But what happens when one person gives nothing and expects everything? I'm David, and for 15 years, I thought I had the perfect marriage. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. But I got one thing right. I built something that couldn't be stolen. At least, not as easily as my wife Rachel thought it could be. When I was 30, I had nothing but ambition and a business idea that everyone said would fail. Rachel was there then, young and beautiful, telling me she believed in my dreams. She'd kiss me goodbye each morning as I headed to another 18-hour day, building what would eventually become a multi-million-dollar consulting firm. Those early years were brutal. Ramen noodles for dinner, sleeping on an air mattress, driving a car held together with duct tape and prayers. But Rachel never complained. She had this way of making our tiny apartment feel like a palace. And when I'd come home exhausted and defeated, she'd remind me why I was fighting so hard. For us, for our future, for the life we'd build together. 10 years later, that life had arrived. The company was thriving, pulling in 7 figures annually. We had the house in the hills, the luxury cars, the country club membership. Rachel had transformed too. Designer clothes, weekly spa appointments, personal trainers, and shopping trips that cost more than most people's monthly salary. I didn't mind. I'd worked for this, and seeing her happy made every sacrifice worth it. Seeing her happy made every sacrifice worth it. But success has a way of revealing people's true nature, and Rachel's transformation went deeper than her wardrobe. The first sign came through our credit card statements. I'd always handled the finances. It was my area, and Rachel claimed numbers bored her. But when unusual charges started appearing, I had to ask questions. Personal training sessions 3 times a week seemed excessive. But Rachel explained she wanted to stay in shape for me. The expensive workout clothes, the protein supplements, the post-workout smoothies at trendy cafes. It all seemed reasonable for someone serious about fitness. Then came the weekend girls' trips that happened monthly. Rachel and her friends would disappear to wine country or beach resorts. And while the expenses were significant, I figured she deserved to enjoy the fruits of our success. She'd return relaxed and affectionate, full of stories about spa treatments and long conversations with friends I'd never met. What I didn't realize was that I'd become a stranger in my own marriage. The change was subtle at first. Rachel became less interested in our conversations about the business, claiming work talk stressed her out. She stopped asking about my day, stopped celebrating the big contracts that kept our lifestyle afloat. When I tried to involve her in financial planning or discuss our future, her eyes would glaze over. Planning or discuss our future? Her eyes would glaze over. She'd developed a talent for changing the subject whenever money came up, unless it involved something she wanted to buy. Our intimate life suffered too, though Rachel had explanations for that as well. She was tired from her workouts, stressed about various social obligations, dealing with hormone issues that required expensive treatments from specialists I never met. There was always a reason, always something that would be resolved soon, always a promise that things would get back to normal. But normal never came. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing our accounts when I noticed a pattern I'd somehow missed before. Rachel's personal training sessions weren't random. They followed a schedule that had nothing to do with any fitness routine I'd ever heard of. Morning sessions on weekdays, when she claimed to be meeting friends for coffee. Weekend sessions, when she said she was shopping or at the spa. More concerning were the cash withdrawals, hundreds of dollars at a time, always from ATMs near upscale hotels. When I cross-referenced the dates with her calendar and social media posts, nothing matched up. According to her Instagram, she was at yoga class when the bank records showed her withdrawing cash downtown. She was supposedly having lunch with her sister when she was actually pulling money from an ATM near the Marriott. That night, I did something I'd never thought I'd have to do in my marriage. I hired a private investigator. Michael Torres came highly recommended by my attorney, a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations. When I explained the situation, he didn't seem surprised. Apparently, the wealthy businessman whose wife develops expensive new hobbies is a story he'd heard many times before. Most people don't want to know the truth, he told me during our first meeting. They want to prove they're wrong, that their suspicions are just paranoia. But you strike me as someone who makes decisions based on facts. He was right. I'd built my business on data and analysis, and I needed to apply that same objectivity to my marriage. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which I went through the motions of normal married life while waiting for confirmation of what I already knew in my gut. Rachel continued her routine. The training sessions, the shopping trips, the girls' weekends, while I smiled and nodded and died a little inside each day. When Michael called with the results, I was in my office reviewing quarterly projections. He asked if I could meet that evening, and something in his tone told me everything I needed to know. The photos were devastating. Rachel and her personal trainer, Marcus, weren't just having an affair. They were living like a couple. Having an affair, they were living like a couple. Hotel rooms, romantic dinners, weekend getaways that she'd told me were spa retreats with friends. The timeline Michael had constructed showed the relationship had been going on for over 2 years. But the photos weren't the worst part. The worst part was the audio recording from their lunch conversation the previous week. David's completely clueless. Rachel's voice came through the speaker with cruel clarity. He's so buried in his work, he doesn't notice anything. I could probably move you into the house, and he'd just assume you were the new gardener. Marcus laughed. When are you going to tell him? Soon. My lawyer says I should wait until after our anniversary. 15 years looks better for alimony than 14. Plus, I want to make sure all the assets are properly documented before I file. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, but I stopped listening after Rachel described her plans to claim half the business. She'd been consulting with a divorce attorney for months, strategically positioning herself to maximize her settlement. The woman I'd loved and trusted was systematically preparing to destroy everything I'd built. That night, I sat in my office until dawn, staring at the photographs scattered across my desk. 15 years of marriage reduced to evidence of betrayal. But as the sun came up, something shifted inside me. The devastation transformed into something colder, more calculating. Inside me, The devastation transformed into something colder, more calculating. If Rachel wanted to play games with my life's work, she was about to discover that I didn't build a multi-million-dollar business by being naive. The next morning, I called my attorney, James Richardson, and scheduled an emergency meeting. James had been my lawyer since the company's early days, handling everything from incorporation to contracts to estate planning. He was also one of the few people who knew exactly how complex my business structure actually was. "I need to know my options," I told him, sliding the investigator's report across his desk. "And I need to move fast." James reviewed the evidence with the same methodical approach he brought to every legal challenge. After an hour, he looked up with what I'd learned to recognize as his strategic planning expression. "She's made several critical mistakes," he said. "First, she's been committing adultery in a state where that still affects divorce settlements. Second, she's been using marital funds to finance the affair. Third, and most importantly, she doesn't understand how your business is actually structured." That last point was key. When I'd incorporated the company years earlier, James had recommended a complex structure designed to protect the business from potential liability issues. The consulting firm was actually owned by a holding company, which was controlled by a trust, which had specific provisions about marital property. Rachel's name wasn't on any of it. About marital property. Rachel's name wasn't on any of it. Legally, she has no claim to the business itself, James explained. She could potentially claim a portion of marital assets, but if we can prove those assets came from the business, and if we can demonstrate adultery and financial waste, her claim becomes very limited. Over the next month, while Rachel continued her double life, I quietly restructured everything. Business assets were moved into protected accounts. Personal property was redistributed. I documented every expense she'd charged to our joint accounts for her affair, every lie she'd told, every dollar she'd wasted on her secret life. The hardest part wasn't the legal maneuvering. It was pretending everything was normal. Sitting across from her at dinner, listening to her fabricate stories about her day, watching her text with Marcus while claiming it was her sister. Every interaction felt like a performance, and I was getting better at my role with each passing day. Rachel, meanwhile, grew more careless. She started staying out later, making excuses that didn't add up, spending money more freely. She was so confident in her secret plans that she stopped bothering to cover her tracks effectively. The end came sooner than either of us expected. On a Friday evening in April, Rachel announced she was going to another spa weekend with friends. She'd be back Sunday night, relaxed and rejuvenated, ready for a romantic dinner to celebrate our upcoming anniversary. Ready for a romantic dinner to celebrate our upcoming anniversary? But I knew from Michael's surveillance that she was actually going to Napa Valley with Marcus, staying at a resort that cost more per night than most people make in a week. That Sunday, while she was supposed to be getting massages and doing yoga, I had the divorce papers served. I wasn't home when she returned. I was at my office, working late as usual, when my phone exploded with calls and texts. The first message was barely coherent, a string of profanity and accusations. The second was more calculating, demanding I call her immediately to work things out like adults. I didn't call back. The next morning, Rachel was waiting in my office parking lot. She'd clearly been crying, her designer makeup smeared, her hands shaking as she confronted me. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded. "After everything we've built together." "Everything I've built," I corrected. "You've been planning to steal half of it while sleeping with your trainer. I just decided to protect what's actually mine." That's when her desperation turned to rage. She screamed about her rights, about what she deserved after 15 years of marriage, about how she'd supported my dreams when no one else believed in me. "You supported me?" I asked calmly. "You mean you supported the lifestyle my work provided? There's a difference." The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. There's a difference. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Rachel hired an expensive attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces, but James had prepared for every argument they could make. The adultery evidence was overwhelming. The financial waste was documented, and the business structure was ironclad. Rachel's attorney tried to argue that she'd contributed to the company's success through her emotional support and social connections. They claimed she deserved compensation for the years she'd sacrificed her own career to support mine. James demolished these arguments with precision. He presented evidence that Rachel had never held a job during our marriage, had contributed nothing to the business operations, and had actually hindered my work with her increasing demands and expensive habits. He showed how she'd used marital funds to finance an extramarital affair, violating her fiduciary duty to the marriage. Most devastating was the recording where she'd mocked my dedication to work while planning to steal the fruits of that labor. The final settlement was nothing like what Rachel had expected. Instead of half the business assets, she received minimal alimony for just 3 years, enough to get back on her feet, but nowhere near the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. The house would be sold, with the proceeds split after I was reimbursed for the down payment I'd made before our marriage. Reimbursed for the down payment I'd made before our marriage. She kept her car and personal belongings, but the jewelry, art, and luxury items purchased with business income remained with me. Marcus, it turned out, had lost interest once Rachel's financial prospects dimmed. Their great love story ended about as quickly as it had begun, leaving Rachel to face her new reality alone. The last time I saw her was at the final court hearing. She looked smaller somehow. Older, the confidence and entitlement stripped away. As we left the courthouse, she approached me one last time. "I really did love you once," she said quietly. "Maybe," I replied, "but you love the money more." 6 months later, I'm rebuilding my life on terms I can trust. The business is stronger than ever, protected by legal structures that reflect the reality of who contributed what. I've learned to enjoy success without needing someone else's validation, to find satisfaction in work well done, rather than in another person's approval. Rachel, according to mutual friends, is working as a real estate agent, living in a modest apartment, driving a used car. She tried to reconcile with Marcus, but apparently, personal trainers aren't as interested in middle-aged women without trust funds. She's dating again, though I'm told she's having trouble finding men who meet her standards. Standards set by a lifestyle she can no longer afford. I don't take pleasure in her struggles, but I don't feel guilty about them either. She made her choices with full awareness of the consequences. She chose betrayal over loyalty, theft over partnership, lies over truth. The fact that those choices led to exactly what anyone could have predicted isn't my responsibility. Building something real takes work, dedication, and sacrifice. It requires choosing long-term success over short-term gratification, commitment over convenience, truth over comfortable lies. Those who only take from others' efforts, who contribute nothing but expect everything, eventually discover that empty hands are all they're left with. The funny thing about revenge is that the best kind doesn't require you to do anything cruel or vindictive. Sometimes, the most perfect revenge is simply protecting what you've built and letting natural consequences play out. Rachel thought she could have it all: the affair, the luxury, and half my business. She discovered that people who try to steal other people's dreams often end up with nothing but their own regrets. They say money can't buy happiness, but it sure can protect you from those who'd steal it. And sometimes, that protection is the most valuable investment you'll ever make.